So, yeah, thanks for having me, Jason. I appreciate it. Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk to you guys. So my name is Doug. I work with Dolan Construction. Ron is my father, and well, it's his son, right? So we've been in the construction space for about 35 years. Not me personally, not that old yet. He's been doing it for 35 years. He started with foundations and framing for the first few years of his life. And then after that, he's been doing custom homes almost the whole time after that. So typically we're a customer first situation. We recently got into doing spec houses, which interesting timing for sure. So yeah, I've been doing it for about 12 to 15 years. So since I was about 16 years old. Jason mentioned to me that I'd like to have someone present about new construction. So yeah, here we are. By the end of this, my hope is that I can give you guys a bit of an idea of what the landscape of construction looks like right now, show you how a good contractor can be useful, give you an idea of how to do due diligence on your contractor, get an idea, do they have enough horsepower for what the type of projects you're looking at is, right? I'll go through some of our processes, not so much to just brag about how we do things, but so you can get an idea of what the backdrop of the construction business looks like sometimes. So yeah. First off, I was going to get a show of hands and get a feel for how many people have had, you know, a so-so to a bad experience with a contractor currently. Bad experience? Yeah, bad experience. Yeah, sure. Okay. What about good experiences then? There you go. Good. So somewhere in the middle. Okay, good. So just the table of contents to give you an idea of what we're going to look at. I'll give you an idea of our company profile, some of the key people that we have. Again, not so much to talk about our key people, more to give you an idea of some of the structures behind the scenes, depending on the size of the company. But in our case, we're about 10 houses a year at the moment. So it gives you an idea of what that might look like. Key activities of what we do, what type of construction we can do as well. Then we'll go through the Dolan process, which is really kind of from conception and meeting all the way to under construction. It's going to give you a 5-stage overview of what we typically do. We'll look at cost plus versus bid jobs as well. Give you an idea of what those look like. I know cost plus is a bit of a scary term, and it's been thrown around a lot since the prices have been changing. And so, yeah, we'll give you an idea of what we can fixate and what we can't fixate on the pricing side of things. I'll give you a cost analysis, give you a bit of an idea of what things cost lately, at least on our end. So there's going to be pluses and minuses depending on the level of quality of the home or the, you know, what part of the market we're talking about, pardon me. We tend to be probably upper middle to lower high, somewhere in there. You know, we're not building much above $1.5 million houses right now. So some of my numbers probably could be shaved depending on who we're building for, what demographic. So, and then we'll go over the pros and cons of new construction, get an idea for what's good, what's bad about it. I'll go over some frequently asked questions as well. I'll touch very briefly on new home warranty, some of the coverage that we have if you work with us. I was going to talk about areas of interest in Nanaimo. I just have 2 in mind that are worth talking about when it comes to new construction. Development permits and riparian areas, we'll touch on those, how those can be a problem, and how to do your due diligence on those and not buy a piece of property that's actually not worth as much as it looks on paper. Touch on just some of our future plans, how we might be of service to people in the room here. And then the key products and service, I slashed that, unfortunately, it's still on the table of contents. And then we'll go closing remarks and questions. Jason, I don't know if you mind. I'm happy to take the odd question in the middle of the presentation, but if people have any questions or confused about some of the terms I'm using, you're welcome to ask. It's just our company profile. You know, taking the vision for your family, future, and home, bringing it to life is why we do what we do. Earning the trust of those we work with is the true currency of our Dolan construction. And through this exchange, we continue to create value for those who have entrusted us to do so. It sounds a lot like a plug. I'm trying to not plug too much, but Our commitment, we're committed to delivering a high quality product on time and on budget. The warranty we use is just a 2510 national warranty, and with safety, just compliant with WorkSafe. And part of the reason I brought this up outside of a soft plug was it is worth knowing if your contractor has some of these things. There are times where you can kind of get away without it. I think the bigger the projects we're looking at, the more the warranty and the safety is going to be relevant. Obviously, the safety, if something bad happens, I don't think anyone wants blood on their hands on their site, right? Especially as real estate investors. But from more of just a cash and investment side, if we're not compliant, there's a fairly decent chance they can come shut down the site and obviously slow down your investment, right? So that's not good either. So, just some key people. So I'll quickly go through the people that actually work with us. Most of the reason I wanted to bring it up is just to give you an idea of some of the structure you might see in a business our size. So you got the chief executive officer, which is my father, also the owner, and he just oversees management, and then it goes down the hierarchy type thing. So we got Bruce McDougall, who's our construction manager. He's also our estimator. So the guy that's doing the estimations, also keeping an eye on the financials. His job in general is to oversee the project managers, which I couldn't fit on here. So a CM is going to keep an eye on what the project managers are doing with boots on the ground, and make sure the financials are appropriate, the timelines, and the quality as well. So then you got me there. I'm doing operations at the moment. I still got the tan line though. I'm wearing the tool belt during the day sometimes as well. Labor is shy lately, so you have to do a little bit of both. I typically deal with building systems, dealing with the financials, looking at business development type things, and trying to find some more people to work with. So that's kind of my thing. And then, yeah, trying to get into other areas of construction, trying to find people that want to partner up and do development and look more into multifamily opportunities as well. My brother, Ryan Dolan, who happens to work with us as well, he does construction coordination. So just as an example, if anyone here was to all of a sudden work with us, construction coordinator, generally the way we use them, and I'm sure it's similar in other companies as well, is really going to be the point man for correspondence, the person that's going to reach out to you and then take care of picking your interiors, take care of your paint, picking out your exteriors. He's going to then voice all that over the estimator, those types of things, and make sure you get an estimate based on what you actually want to build, right? And that gives us the best chance at giving you more and more fixed cost and trying to pull away from some of those cost plus situations, which I'll touch on in a moment. So they weren't on here, but our project managers essentially are going to be the guys with the tool belts on in some cases. I think they'd rather not, but lately they've had to. But the project managers, again, are just going to correspond with our construction manager and keep an eye. Pardon me, the construction managers making sure that they're putting nails in the wall on time and to the right quality. So just briefly, key activities for us, it's residential construction and getting into land development. And then we got the pros and cons we'll talk about in a second. So our process, typically, I think a lot of construction companies probably do it similarly. We usually start off pretty softly with a meet and greet. Come meet you at site, meet you really wherever, a coffee shop, like I said. Generally, this is going to be free. This isn't something that we're going to be charging for. You're not on the clock if we meet up with you and start to talk with you about your project. At that point, I think we're filtering each other, getting an idea if you like us, if we like you. We're in the custom home space, so it's really due diligence on your customers, super important. I think it's the same, honestly, with working with real estate investors as well. If you want to build those long-term relationships, you got to like me and I got to like you, right? So meet and greet is generally, like I said, free, and anyone's welcome to reach out and do that depending on what type of project they're looking at. Typically, when the clock turns on, it's going to be designed at that point. If you already have a design, you can move right to the estimating process. Typically with us, we might do a little bit of due diligence on your plans, make sure it was done appropriately, make sure the guy before you, didn't take you to the cleaners and set something up that we maybe wouldn't build. But let's say you don't have plans. We don't yet have a full-time in-house designer, but we do have someone that works super closely with us, and we will set you up with that individual. Ideally, at that point during the meet and greet, we've already talked about budgets, gotten an idea for what your cap is on your price. Because one thing that happens with designers in some cases, our guy's pretty good based on the long-term relationship. It's not uncommon, especially architects, for them to kind of the tail to wag the dog, right? They'll start to overbuild for you, and by the time you find out that they've went that far into the drawings, you're maybe $100,000, $200,000 past what you would have wanted. So it's our job to make sure by working with the construction coordinator and voicing your budgets that our design team doesn't push it too far. So something to consider. So let's assume you're happy with design. We got, in your guys' case, it's gonna be different than a single family home typically, or a typical custom home, right? It's gotta make money. So I know one of the things we've seen a lot of is kind of three bed up, 2 down in the suite. That's pretty typical. So let's just say, in this case, that's what we went with, right? So at that point, we're gonna look at doing the estimation. So the construction coordinator is already going to have had these conversations with you, and then we will get that information up to the construction manager and the estimator, and he's going to put together an estimate for you. We'll talk more about cost plus and fixed costs or bidding in a moment, but the combination inside of that estimate will be the case, right? So, but those things are all pre-negotiated. Everyone will know what parts of the job can have overages and what parts of the job cannot have overages. But again, I'll touch on that in a minute. So typically the estimating process doesn't usually end super fast. It's not usually a one-time thing. There's a fairly decent chance, we might you'll see what we put together as a number, and you might want to come back and slightly change your design, change some of the flooring, possibly bring the cost down type situation. So it's a little bit of a dance. The estimation and design process can sometimes go back and forth a little bit. Typically, it will get simpler with people like yourselves that are doing, more, it's for real estate investment. It's a little bit different, whereas we're used to hand-holding a little bit more with custom homes, right? People really want to make sure it's what they want. So that process can be shorter, especially if you know what you want. And then obviously, if the relationship starts to get longer and we build more and more for you, obviously it becomes more plug and play. So anyways, the estimate at that point, let's say we're all good. You're happy with the price. You're happy with what we came up with design. We're going to move to the contract and permitting phase. So all the stuff from the estimate, the final price is going to be put into the contract. Then we are going to lay out essentially our responsibilities and your responsibilities as a customer. And we're going to give you an idea of what fits inside the cost plus, where overages can happen, where they can't happen. And when everyone's happy with the contract, then we get to move forward. After the contract is good to go, we're going to engage consultants if we haven't already, get them prepped and get everything set up to get you guys ready to submit your building permit. And so we're going to deal with the city in that case, which is probably the least fun part. Just quick numbers off the top of my head. Right now, Parksville and Landsville typically are about 2 weeks-ish, 2 to 3 weeks. So they're some of the fastest. They're good places to invest right now. A little quicker turnover on your capital. What else? We have Lake Cowichan. Feels a little bit more like 4 to 5. They can be a bit slow. The guy's only there on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So that's not super fun. And they don't talk, by the way. If you ever talk to admin, do not expect them to get something to the building permit guy. You have to call yourself to find out. And then the worst of the worst is the RDN. RDN has been 16 to 20 weeks in a lot of cases for us lately. It's a pretty usual situation right now. So that's just something to consider if you guys are looking at building anywhere. They're going to take you to the cleaners as far as time goes. And assuming that that's only a building permit, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but obviously if you get a property where you either didn't know already or you find out late that you have to do a DP permit, in a lot of cases, the municipalities aren't going to let you do it on top of each other. So it ends up being DP and then BP. And some of these DPs can drag on between as little as a few weeks for more design-based ones, and then obviously into the months for other ones. We recently just had a client, unfortunately, that already bought a property out in RDN, out in Cedar, and they figured that we'd be able to get them a house started in 4 or 5 months, even at those 16-week, 20-week waits. And we dragged the biologist out there, and there was what they are calling a stream, but it's not a stream, believe me. But in the eyes of, I guess at this point it goes to the province. It actually goes up and above the municipality and up to the province. It's a stream, so it's been an issue, and now we're looking at more like probably a 12 months till we can actually start the house, right? So kind of reiterates why I think between the contractors in the room and everyone else here that's not a contractor, the conversation needs to start early, because there's certain things that we see or certain relationships we have with consultants that are really likely to save your ass in some situations at the end of the day. That's not good for a spreadsheet to push your ROI out an extra year. That's a problem, right? And we end up at breaking ground, assuming all these other things get dealt with. And yeah, at that point, usually a lot of back and forth with our construction coordinator. He's going to be your point of contact to get you still making the rest of your customer decisions. Not all the customer decisions, like some of the interiors and such, are completed right away. You generally at least get a good framework, so there's no room for your budgets to go over, but there's still room for those conversations. And if you can get there early enough, we can typically change a lot of things as long as it's not too late. As you guys know, supplies have been a bit funky lately. So part of the reason I mentioned the construction coordinator a lot is his job is as early as possible when you meet with us to figure out your commitment level and instantly start making orders. Things like windows. We just made a window order for some relatively decent windows just the other day. And the timeline we're getting from people that have been quite loyal to us and good for a long time is January, late January. So that's pretty rough, right? And we did as much as we can to get ahead of that, right? We got enough administrative horsepower so you can see for the littler guys, it can be even tougher right now if you don't have that support and have those people getting ahead of things right now, right? That can kill a deal, kill occupancy, and obviously for you guys, that means more living costs. So things to consider. So yeah, now I'll touch on bids versus cost plus. This is the terminology we use. I know a bid is kind of the overarching estimate process, but when we say bid, I'm talking about fixing a price. So I'll give you an example. We'll use kitchens as an example. Typically kitchens are more of a budget, which is cost plus, but I'll use a kitchen. So it's an apple is an apple. If I told you guys your kitchen's gonna be $40,000, in the case of bidding, any overages on material and labor becomes our problem. And that's just, that comes out of our markup. And if it peels back even further, it's just our loss, right? So when I talk about fixing a price and trying to get more and more things fixed so that as real estate investors, you can lock in and really be able to tell your investors, this is what it's going to cost within, these parameters. That's what I'm talking about. Whereas cost plus is more variable. Cost plus for us, and I believe most contractors, is usually under the presence of just a CM, which is also usually charging a fee, construction manager situation. And that's really just taking the invoices and throwing markup and whatever CM fee on top of it. I think usually people are going to do their best to give you a little bit of an idea of what the costs are going to be, but that's going to be dependent on how transparent the contractor is. And, when you hear horror stories about overages, we're generally going to be talking about cost plus, right? So I think that there's responsibility on the side of the owner to do their due diligence and find out and make sure you're actually getting enough information about these different costs early on, and then also having a conversation of maybe not so much the conversation, we'll get to it a little bit more, but talking about what a contract looks like and really making sure the line items show what things can be overages and where you can get taken to the cleaners, whereas what things are fixed, and at the end of the day, who's going to deal with those overages. I'm going to go over a little bit of a cost analysis. These are just some of the numbers that we've seen recently on the residential side, which looks to be spelt wrong. My apologies. We've seen between $300 and $4 per square foot, quite common right now. I believe on most of the $400 square foot numbers are going to be down in the single story houses, just less efficiencies. So ranchers are always going to be slightly more expensive per square. Doesn't mean as a net they're more expensive, right? But just in general, when you're looking at that metric, they're a little more expensive looking. Down to the 300, I think you're going to see more 300 in the 2-story houses at the moment, like I was saying, more efficient. I think usually more appealing to people like yourselves. The ranchers aren't the greatest investment property. You know, there's not enough space to get some cash out of it, good rental income, at least not in most cases. Again, take this with a grain of salt. In some cases, I believe we could squeeze under $300 per square foot. Right now, like I said, we're building slightly higher end homes, not necessarily exactly what you'd be looking at putting up. These prices probably fit more with spec builds right now with an exit in mind. Whereas if they were just a rental house, it might be able to squeeze some blood out of a rock and get down on the price. Multifamily prices appear to be between $250 and $400 per square foot right now. Down at $250, you're going to be looking at a pretty easy piece of land. The chances in BC right now of finding something at $250 is pretty tight. As soon as you're going to have to do underground parking, you're going to start to have problems. Right now, I seen a number the other day. It looked like between $35 to $100 per square foot in some cases. More once you have to go underground, right? And obviously 2 stories in some cases can be more of underground parking. Just something worth considering. These are, you know, these can vary a lot, but at least if you're looking at a piece of property and you throw these ranges in there and the pro forma doesn't work, you have a bit of an idea of if it's worth at least having the conversation or just killing the deal. Remediation, which in this case, I'm thinking more demo and getting rid of a home to get ready for new construction. I spoke to a hazardous material guy the other day, and he gave me these ranges as of recent. So he's got 30,000 to 75,000. So those things are worth noting, right? Throwing in your pro forma. If you're going to buy a piece of property that plan on redeveloping, just keep in mind that to get rid of it, if it's got any asbestos and all those other fun things, there's a decent chance it's not going to be cheap. I don't know if anyone here has ever moved a house. Nickel Bros, which is a relatively well-known company in town. In some cases, the actual removal of the home can actually be a bit of a break-even situation. A lot of how they make money is getting rid of it. They are going to take the profit from actually reselling it. So if you do have a house, it is worth calling them. You can get an idea so you can throw in your pro forma. They're pretty quick to give a good answer. Renovations seems to be about $150 to $300 per square foot, at least the ones that we're working on currently. You can definitely go further. The 150 range down in 150 is going to be a lot closer to just things like flooring, baseboard, getting rid of interior doors, maybe some windows. Whereas once you get up to $300 a square foot, we're looking at getting a lot closer to gutting the house, right down to the studs in some cases. So that gives you a bit of an idea for renovations. And then we got additions. Additions are really almost the same. I think honestly, in some cases, more expensive than new construction up in the top left there. So I've got them as the same, because really at the end of the day, usually we're gonna have to do some sort of walking backwards, cleaning off a wall, cut a hole in the wall, prepping it to actually do the new construction, right? So those are just some costs to keep in mind for your numbers.
Very quick question.
Sure.
You talk about efficiency of like residential and multifamily. Obviously, things like ranchers aren't the most efficient. You've got a large roof and not a lot of square footage. Is there more efficient ways, especially like with multifamily? Like, is there a certain number of stories, like 3 stories is cost effective, but there's big prohibitive steps when you go to 4 stories or 5 stories that you want to try to avoid?
Honestly, that's a good question. Still haven't put up my first above 3-story buildings, so I'm probably the wrong guy to ask at the moment. I think really once more stories can be more efficient in general, only because it's still 1 roof, 4 walls, you know what I mean? So there is some efficiencies there. I have heard that it's better, but I can't really clarify.
I don't know, like at a certain point, do you have to transition over to concrete or to steel versus wood?
I think generally after 5 stories, I think actually we might, is it 6 now? I thought, yeah, okay, so it's 6 is where we're starting to change again now. So yeah, I don't know if we really have much over 6 very often lately here, but yeah, so there is that conversion, which, yeah. Sure.
Could you do a 6-story apartment building on top of a 2-car garage, a 2-floor car garage?
That's going to be dependent on zoning and the heights and what heights are within the zoning, right? And then that's something to consider. Would you even want to from a cost perspective?
Yeah.
Just because of BC, typically the underground parking situation could cause so much blasting that the hard cost could be just blow up the deal.
Yeah.
But in some cases you can, I'm sure. It's just depending on.
Just thinking based on space, because there was a deal in Canada River I was looking at a while ago, where we were super limited on space. But if you could squeeze enough units on there and go deep enough in the underground parking, it might end up paying
How
off.
much was it worth approximately?
I mean, not the solar on, but they wanted a $2.5 million for it. It was under 2 acres.
Honestly,
Weird shape too. Really went.
in Camel River, if like Seymour Pacific or someone hasn't scooped it, it's definitely worth being skeptical too. Because they're on the move up there and they got plenty of backing. So
Yeah.
I'd be skeptical of any deal that's still sitting around, you know what I mean, that has that possibility. It's a fairly decent chance that as soon as you looked at the geotech report, it would make sense probably why it's not happening in a big rush. Things to consider for sure. Anybody else? Good. So we'll go through the pros and cons. So the pros, first pro, just knowing your costs, right? With new construction, especially if it's fixed, right? The more of it is fixed, obviously, it's easier to put in your pro forma and get an idea of what the actual costs are going to be. So obviously that comes down to a contractor actually sticking with his pricing. But in general, I know with older buildings, there's always the chance that there's something behind that wall that you just don't know about. And it's very hard to actually do the due diligence. So I know, I'll talk more about it in a second, but one of the cons, obviously, in reference to that is that it is more upfront costs in most cases. And sometimes the costs are just the holding costs, right? If it's a bare piece of land briefly, you're not going to get any rental income. So you have to be able to factor that in. See if it's a net benefit for you, right? One of the other pros I see is differentiation and branding. This is going to be dependent on everyone's goals, right? Are you trying to have a brand that's more specific and more easy to see? I think with a good interior designer and a good exterior designer, you're going to have an opportunity to kind of show yourself off and people to be able to tell, oh, so-and-so built that, or, you know, that combination of a real estate investor and a contractor. It's just one other way for people to notice what you're up to. I also think with more and more people having to rent, there's a fairly decent chance people are going to want to have something that they can be somewhat excited about, right? Like, I think a lot of people are getting peeled out of the custom market. They're going to have really no chance anytime soon of having something that's their own. So, you know, the nicer the building or the better you can take less expensive materials and still make it look like a good end product, I think you're going to have an advantage as a real estate investor. Tailored product, just the fact that you can build specifically to the clients that you're actually looking to service, right? So depending on your investment strategy, there might be a certain type of building that makes a lot more sense for you. I guess you have to weigh the benefits or the pros and cons of going out and finding those. Are they available in the market, or is it easier to take a piece of property that either has a cheap house, plow it over, or just wait for property to actually build out what you want to build for your investors, right? The contracts can be helpful, right? You get an idea of what you're getting into. They're legally binding enough that we do have to do what we said we're going to do. I still believe if in business, if it's not going to work with a handshake, there's a fair decent chance it can still get messy. But at the same time, the binding contracts definitely, yeah, they're going to take average people and make them a little bit better, right? Yeah, and it also might help with some of your investors, the fact that you can take that to your investors, show them that the person you're working with is, you know, this is what they're bound to do, and might bring some comfort to them. Then higher tenant quality and retention. This is somewhat speculation, but I believe obviously the nicer the space that you have, maybe slightly more expensive, it's going to do some of the filtering for you. Those that can afford it and they're putting in the work and keeping up with their job might end up being better tenants, which could be a better situation for you. And then the retention part is if there's not problems because it's a new building, if we did our job, there's a very decent chance they're not going to be leaving very often. Where else are they going to go? So that could reflect in your vacancy rate. So we'll go to the cons. We have the increased costs. So if you buy a bare piece of land, obviously now you've got property taxes, you have holding costs, you're burning through money until it actually gets built. So that is important to note. And, somewhere in there, maybe is it year 2, is it year 3, where you actually start to break even. So as real estate investors, you got to keep that in mind. It can be exciting to have a new house, but a new house on the wrong piece of property actually might not be the way to go. So, which in some cases, that's where a renovation or addition might actually do that for you. And so you'll have to excuse me, there it says differentiation of branding again, which is a boo-boo. What was meant to be there was supply issues at the moment. So one of the cons is just the supply problems we're having right now. Labor is another factor, but lately the pricing based on the supply has went down a little bit with lumber. Lumber isn't quite as bad as it was. Something to keep in mind for anyone that's looking at developments. I haven't heard very many good things about the civil products right now. Anything based on petroleum products has been a little bit slower. I don't know if that's gotten any better. No. Yeah. It's just can kill a project. I spoke to a civil construction contractor recently, and when he said he wanted his pipes for a subdivision, within 6 months, the guy on the other end of the phone laughed at him. So just something to consider right now. There are plenty of benefits to new construction, but it's worth half of where, without sounding like we're bragging, it's reaching out and working with a contractor. Is sometimes those connections just end up saving you a lot of money because they can do some of that due diligence for you, and you can actually get a good feel. Your pro forma might look good, but if it doesn't factor in an 18-month wait, that can be problematic. On the labor side of things, as far as being an issue, that's going to be contractor to contractor dependent, and it's going to have a lot to do with what they actually can voice to you. As long as they're not making big promises that sound unrealistic, you're probably good in most cases, right? We're contractually bound. So if we do say we're going to make it in this timeline, there's always room to have penalties in there. So you're going to hold them a little bit more accountable on the labor side of things. So that's kind of that one. One of the other cons is the zoning and setbacks. So sometimes we're going to have grandfathered in setbacks. So you go buy an old house, you're planning on being able to build on it. There's a fairly decent chance, depending on how old it is, that the zoning and the setbacks that come with that zoning might not be the case now. So if you're not doing your due diligence well, there's a fairly decent chance that you might want to plug out an addition, or you might want to just build a new house, and you won't be able to based on that zoning. So that's something to watch out for. An example of something we ran into recently, and is pretty common here on the island, is the setbacks for the ocean. We had someone out in Madrona that wanted to build a new house originally, and we ended up having to do a massive reno for them instead, just so that it didn't engage the setbacks, and it would have pulled their house back plenty of meters away and would have kind of killed the ocean view. So just something to think about. That's more on the custom home side of things, but just keeping that in mind. Again, when you're doing your due diligence on a property, there's a chance that if you go to build again, it could be a problem. Development costs. So that's going to be a combination of DCCs. I think some municipalities are calling them CACs as well. Amenity contributions and land dedications. I'm going to dive into those a little bit more on the next slide. I'll dive into the DCCs more on the next slide, pardon me, but amenity contributions, I just have one figure off the top of my head. It's about $3,000 per lot right now in Lanceville and Nanaimo, from what I remember. So just something to keep in mind, you're going to be paying for that. I got whiff the other day that Lanceville is looking more into 5% land dedications as well. So we're recently going through a development right now, and so they're not as excited about money. They're more excited about the land in this case. So again, just something to consider. You might think you have 13 lots in your subdivision, but it could turn to 12, right? Whether that's a deal killer or not, your spreadsheet will tell. One of the other cons, again, is cost plus. That's where the horror stories come from, right? We kind of talked about how to do your due diligence on that. But again, just something that could be a problem from the new construction perspective. This is just Nanaimo's DCCs, one of the charts. So when are DCCs collected? The ones that generally are going to concern most of us the most would be the residential subdivision. at final approval there. If you look down there, typically that's about a $17,000 hit on each lot. So that's just worth considering. You always got to have those numbers in your pro forma. I'm not sure if anyone's a mobile home park person, but again, prior to building permit being issued, you're going to get hit with these DCCs as well. For the additions to multifamily, commercial, institutional, or industrial buildings prior to building permit issue. So again, that could be relevant to people in the room as well. So that number, I believe you got all those numbers there. And you want to be looking at the bottom number, just in case you're not. It looks like they typically are still using gross area, meters squared. So you got to figure out your square footage, divide it by 10.76, and then you do the math and get an idea. And then, yeah, for the conversion of existing buildings to a newer, higher use category, in a lot of cases, that's not something I've had to tackle, but worth noting. And when they're not payable is purpose of worship, not a problem for most of us in here, not building churches. When the value of work authorized under the building permit was less than $50,000, so you're not going to get hit with DCCs at that point. And where the interior renovation will not add to the city's capital cost burden. Does anyone in here happen to know what that actually means, that last part there? Capital cost burden? I've never figured that one out. Interior renovation will not add to the cost burden. Would that be maybe if it doesn't end up picking up more garbage, there's no more garbage pickup and they're not worried about more people, which could turn into a bill for them? Just speculating.
You're building something that's not using water and sewer and all of the.
That's what I wanted right there.
And just out of curiosity, like things like water supply and like RDN, sanitary stuff, if you're developing and you're putting in a well and a septic system, does that mean you don't have to pay those fees?
I've actually never got to see it that granular.
No, they have different DCCs. So your rural district will have separate DCCs, which means Nanaimo, you're paying for all three services, where rural like City of Port Alberta, they don't have DCCs for them. Village of Cumberland is 25,000 for one lot. There's a infrastructure cost much because the water product is expensive. Okay, so it just depends on.
You say already killed theirs?
Yeah, they don't have anything.
Pro development.
Oh, very much so.
Good to know. So yeah, there's the numbers. So some of the questions that we get asked. So how long do design and permitting processes usually take? So typically design, assuming you had no design, came to us, it's going to be probably 3 to 4 weeks with a designer getting that house put together for you. Sometimes it takes longer, but I think people like yourselves cases, typically you're going to know what you want because it's based on real estate investment. So it's going to be a little simpler, a little faster. Permitting processes, as I said, can be pretty brutal, up to 2 weeks, up to 16. We already talked about which municipalities are worth staying away from or worth factoring into your numbers. When do contractors in the new construction process usually start charging? In our case, usually the clock is generally off till the design process. Then at that point, we know we're engaged. I think it can change for everyone, but it depends on their letter of engagement. And it's definitely a question worth asking. Because if you ever have to step out, you don't want to get tagged with a big bill that you didn't know you were going to get. Can we buy our own material or hire sub-trades we already know? Not my favorite question. It's a yes and a no. It depends. So I'll give you a bit of an idea of why or why not. Buying your own material. In most cases, people are just trying to step away from paying markup on those services, which I do understand. It does make sense. The only thing that we have to keep in mind as contractors, and not so much just myself, any contractors you deal with, is we still, at the end of the day, have a new home warranty that we're responsible for. So in a lot of cases, lumber is lumber, but there are some benefits to the people that are going to be responsible for it. Still, at the end of the day, get to figure out where the product's coming from, what quality it is. So that's part of the reason you might have your contractor trying to steer away from you buying the product. And then hiring your own sub-trades. Sometimes they're great. In a lot of cases, you end up meeting your next best sub-trade just through a client. So it's not necessarily a no, it's just something worth considering if you have friends in the trades. The only time it's not super exciting again is the buck never gets passed properly. We're still reliable, or pardon me, we're still responsible for the timelines. So if we said we were going to do something in 6 months and your buddy drags his feet and we can't technically prove that it was him, it causes issues. So that's where someone in the contracting space might say no to you about that. Will we be on budget? Yeah, ideally. That's typically, like I said, still going to be based on what the contract looked like. At this point, this far into the process, you already have looked at a contract. You'll know which stuff was fixed on your contract, and you will know what stuff had the possibility of going over. Something I think I didn't mention, when we create cost plus job or estimates, we call it a budget. So again, we'll go back to that kitchen reference. In our case, if we put in a budget for $40,000 on your kitchen, if you spend $35,000, we actually are going to credit $5,000 and put that against the final bill, because that's how we do that version of cost plus. Whereas if you go over, you go 45 grand, you are going to be subject to the $5,000 payable, right? So that's one way that we put that price in an estimate, and you see that your kitchen is budgeted for $40,000, but it will be told, or you'll know based on its same budget, that there's a possibility for overages or under. So that's something worth noting. How change orders and extras work. In our case, it's through the construction coordinator. In a lot of people's case, it'd be through a project manager that you're working hand in hand with. Typically, what happens is the construction coordinator in our case is going to talk to you. You're going to say, we want to do a $45,000 kitchen. You're going to be reminded that you were only going to do a $40,000 kitchen. Are you still okay with this? He's going to make a bill, send it over to you, make sure you're happy with it, and then it goes through. That's typically how we do change orders. Everything's recorded, and it shouldn't be a surprise to you that you went over on your budget. Obviously, at that point too, we got to get your approval. So once you say yes, it's too late at that point. Does building a custom home or new construction take longer? I think it depends who you're working with. A lot of people are definitely using the excuse of lack of supply and lack of labor right now to stretch timelines. Some of it's legit, and then some of it's just becoming commonplace to make that an excuse. I think one of the best things you can do is try and find a contractor. Obviously, you want to filter them, try and get some references if you can. Something else to consider is if it's a one-man show, there's a chance that that guy is busier than he's ever been in his life. Yes, you might save some money because his overhead's slightly smaller, but again, the guy's wearing 30 hats right now. The chances of him forgetting something and killing a timeline is relatively higher. And right now, more important than ever is if someone forgets to order windows, those windows can stop the project at the end of the project, just that miss, right? So definitely relevant. Where do I start with financing for a new build? Typically, when we're working with someone, it's easiest for us to talk to your financier early on, only because some financiers want different stuff. Some of them will take a budget with a 10% contingency and say that's fine. Some of them actually want a contract, something that's signed and more official. So just worth noting. The new home warranty. So this is the type of warranty that we're using. So typically on the 2 years of coverage, it's going to be on labor and materials. For the first 12 months, it's going to be our responsibility to deal with any defects on the house when it comes to labor and materials. For the following 12 months and for that whole 24 months, we're going to be responsible for defects on labor and materials for some of the larger systems like plumbing, electrical, and heating. So that's where we'll be held accountable. There are some gray areas, but in general, that is worth noting that if there's any issues in your new house, it shouldn't be part of your maintenance costs. On the 5 years, we're going to be covering the building envelope, which is usually a leakage problem on our end, typically, which is going to include anything related to the vapor barriers. We're going to be looking at siding, trims, windows, roofing, that type of thing. So if there's any issues there, typically that becomes our issue. It's something we got to come take care of for you. And then as we get out to 10 years, Hopefully we're not having issues, but we got structural components of the home. So if we made a boo-boo on things like trusses, beams, timbers, stuff like that, you know, we're gonna get a call. We're gonna have to come give you a hand and see what we can do for you. This is some of the less fun stuff, development permits. Like I said, these are real timeline killers, and they can kind of come out of nowhere nowadays. The municipalities are God now, and if they say it's a stream, it's a stream. So to make sure there's no puddles on your property when you go to bring anyone over there to take a look. So the DPs, typically it's going to be things like areas that relate to wildlife, relate to water courses, related to fire hazards in some cases, steep slopes. Those are just some of the development permit areas you're going to see in various municipalities. Some of them are quick. Some of them will just take a quick biologist visit. Sometimes it's just an arborist. Some of them are relatively simple. One of the development permit areas that we have in Nanaimo, it seems to be one of the easier ones to deal with, is in the old city corridor area. It's a design development permit. So it's not wildlife. You just have to meet the needs. I think it's more you need wood trims and a few things in the old city space. So that's a more simple development permit to deal with. Again, some of them are just on the municipal level, and then some of them are going all the way up to the government right now. And the government ones are, yeah, not fun. And there's definitely a lot more consultants involved there. So a thing that's definitely worth noting or finding out about before it happens.
And I just add archaeological sites
Right.
as well.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
something people forget about. So archaeological sites get registered when remains are found on a property. It doesn't show up on the title. And typically it's not a problem, but if you're anywhere near water, it's very, very common if you're close to the ocean or a lake.
Yeah.
If it is an archaeological site, again, it won't show up on the title. You might not know about it. Hopefully your real estate agent is good enough to look into that before you bought it. If it is an archaeological site, that means you basically have to have an archaeologist on site anytime you're doing any sort of renovations that require digging into the ground deeper than 6 inches. That can be very expensive to have on site, and if they find anything while you're digging, it's going to be a big old stop sign until they deal with any remains or anything that's on the property. That being said, just because it's not in an archaeological site doesn't mean that it won't turn into one when they start digging and find something. So it's very common on the island here. I don't know if anyone's familiar with like the subdivision up in Craig Bay, up in the Parksville area. There's a huge area of Oceanside that is left apart, and that's supposed to be houses. There's a whole huge burial ground there. That's why there's no houses there. So the developer basically had to keep those 4 or 6 lots and couldn't develop them. So just one more thing to try to think of when you're actually dealing with issues that might arise on the property.
Yeah, that's one of the worst ones.
Well, that's exactly. If you're building something, you're going deeper than 6 inches. Yeah.
It's worse around the ocean, I think, too, in some
It's
cases.
definitely along the ocean. It's almost, yeah, big red flag that they can pop up anywhere.
There you go. We'll touch on riparian too. So riparian in some cases still is going to be water courses, wildlife-based stuff, and again, stuff that doesn't even look like a water course, wetlands, things that look like they might have been wet at one point. It could be a seasonal problem. That's another thing worth noting. It's a good idea to engage a biologist early, just in case, because there's a chance that something that might run dry during the summer could instantly become an issue as soon as it gets wet again, right? And all of a sudden you're going to get treated a lot differently at the city. And a property that you bought in the summer, well, the prices are hot and everyone's excited, isn't so good anymore. So typically the biggest problem with riparian areas is going to be the setbacks, right? So something to consider. I've seen multiple properties over the last year. When you first see the property, you wonder, how has no one bought this already, right? You think you might have finally found a gem, and then you end up speaking with a biologist, and they can send you a due diligence report, usually fairly easy. He's going to give you an idea of the setbacks from the top of bank, if it's got a bank, or from the center of the stream, and instantly you know what's not usable anymore. And a lot of them usually are deal killers, similar to the property. If it's still on market, there's a fairly decent chance someone already knows, right? Especially on the island, I think most people have figured out pretty fast. It's anything that's still around right now is you should be skeptical about, because there's not big enough players here now that they buy it. It's that you don't hear about a lot of the deals, right? So something to consider. Yeah. For the areas of interest, one area that I just thought was interesting, I've seen some good things happening there, and it's a relatively affordable area at the moment, is up in the Old City Quarter. The zoning is typically, I've seen a lot of R14 to R15, and that's a pretty reasonable zoning there. So that zoning has a yield of 0.65 to 0.85 FAR, right? So timesing that by the square footage of the lot. Obviously, still you have to keep in mind parking, and parking is always going to be the worst thing. Like you're going to have to reverse engineer usually from parking, so you have to watch. Don't get too excited when a realtor throws together. It says, you know, times it by 0.65. You still want to get a layout and find out, am I going underground or does this even make sense? But anyways, the reason that area is good, outside of the fact that it's got decent density potential, a lot of the houses aren't in super good shape. So it's about as close as you get to land costs, you know, buying bare land in general. I think one of the other issues you're going to have in Nanaimo now outside of this area is even where there's good zoning, you're buying a beautiful home. So it's not going to be exciting that you're going to have to tear down a house that has high value. So I think there's something else about that area I quite like.
Sorry, what was that 0.65?
So that's just the floor area ratio. So you take the square footage of the lot and then times it by that. Now that's a maximum density. So in the case of a 10,000 square foot lot, your maximum building space would be 6,500 square feet, assuming you still have to fit under height numbers, you know what I mean, and zoning setbacks. You still have to play by those rules.
So you can build on 65.
Yeah, so what's pretty common now is, especially the last little bit of property that's still sitting on the market, is you're seeing people put together a little rendering and a bit of an idea of what something can be. You know, they're going to throw the biggest number at you that you can build. And then when you actually do your due diligence, it's not the case. So they throw a big multiple on the property. But what you're best to do very early on is either find someone that can, or someone that does work with a designer, and get a little bit of a layout created, and at least see if you're still going to meet the green space needs. Are you going to meet the parking needs? And do you still have room for that many units or that much square footage? Then at that point, you can actually do your numbers and see if it's actually worth that much, right? So
And I
something,
think there's something in the Old City Quarter where you don't need as many parking spots.
I believe it was better for parking. You're right.
Around
Yeah.
like the Selby area, you don't need as many parking spots.
I think it was a little bit better in the Old City area. I don't know the exact number. I know it's a pretty common to see between 1.62 and 2 parking stalls per two bedroom units. So, but yeah, that's an interesting area. And then a more general area right now, more of an actual zone need, not so much an area, is the corridor. So I don't know if anyone here is familiar with corridor or built anything in the corridor areas, but Nanaimo right now has a lot of areas that are, the OCP is supportive of corridor, and corridor is going to be the mixed use properties. It's going to be usually commercial down and residential up. And again, a lot of the cases, if you look at these corridor areas, I'm not sure if you guys use the GIS map much there for Nanaimo. Yeah. If you lay over the OCP, it's typically yellow, I think, these corridor areas. And the corridor areas, like I said, in a lot of cases already have cheaper houses on them as well. So again, now you're starting to buy land more so than beautiful homes. So a knockover and an assembly makes more sense. They're still require a decent amount of due diligence because they can look more exciting than they really are. But yeah, so the corridor areas and the old city areas, just from a new construction perspective, are relatively exciting opportunities, and we're taking a peek at. Oh, it's time for another plug. So yeah, just us right now. Like I said, we're single family builders. We're partnering up with some construction managers from a multifamily space. And looking to do more deals in the holding property space, some development, and then we're also looking at mergers and acquisitions. So if anyone knows anyone selling a construction business, I'm happy to take a look at that. That's the end of that plug. And so, yeah, that's kind of the end. We'll go to questions in a second if there is any more. Generally, I hope that was somewhat helpful, giving you guys an idea of some of the stuff that goes into contracting at the moment, how to maybe take a peek behind the scenes of your contractor, see if some of those things are there. At the very least, it's going to set you up to ask some decent questions and see if it's a good situation. So, yeah, thank you. Sure.
It's part about your business.
Sure.
So you're a custom builder.
Yes.
You've been in business in the envelope space for several years. You've seen the growth in Nanaimo.
Yes.
In some of your slides, you talk about building brands. You talk about construction costs. I'm just wondering, why do you stick to that sort of business model of custom building as opposed to, let's say, getting into subdivision plots, building 6 packs, building a brand of your own?
Mhm.
Is it just too expensive to get into the space?
No.
Or what's
No, we are moving into that space. We have something waiting for a stamp on PLA relatively soon. So we are doing some subdivisions at the moment. The reason partially for sticking with single family at the moment is it's already what I do. So sometimes you don't pivot too hard in a good market, right? You don't want to run away from good cash flow to completely change your model. The idea for me in the future is to make it complementary and kind of grow the branches. But there is good money in custom homes. I can't say there's not, right? Depending on who you're building for, right? When people really know what they want and they've been saving up for a while, it's still a good business, right? It's nice to work for people too, but it's still personal. So if you like working with people, it's a decent business to be in. So.
I was just sort of thinking from the point of view of the South End development that's going to be happening over the next few years.
Sandstone?
Yeah, that they're going to be looking for people like you to build,
Yep.
buy 10-pack lots and
Yep.
build your brand. Right?
Yeah, we're definitely not steering away from that. That will probably fall on my plate. I have my own corporation, Dolan Developments, so I'll keep that off from the flagship. Stay away from my dad's company just for that stuff. You never know. So yeah, technically that's what that space was going to be for. Anything in Part 9 and multifamily and stuff would be in that corporation. This is generally just the general contracting portion of the business for single family.
You be concerned if, let's say, you go buy a 10-pack of lots in the market, let's say you go buy that tomorrow.
Yeah.
And in the custom space, I know there's not as much risk there in that sense, so you go buy 10-pack lots.
Yeah.
And the market dies 50%. Your bid build, construction costs are high, and your profit goes where?
Down. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's why
Yeah.
like, that's just too risky. This market is volatile and shit.
Yeah. So we have lots in Parksville right now that 3 sold. The 4th was under contract. Unfortunately, the person actually passed away. This was right at the peak. So that was about I forget when that was. That could have been. When did things start to slow down? Has it been 4 months now?
February.
Yeah, probably February. It wasn't quite sunny out, to put it to you that way. And so, yeah, that situation is somewhat happening, and it's a waiting game now. We do have 2 properties that we built based, we knew maybe a correction, but, you're trying to beat it. And so, yeah, there's a chance that you will take a $100,000 haircut. Not necessarily no profit, significantly less, but it was getting pretty stupid in this space. As of late, there's a lot of money to be made from the gap of actual costs, being able to throw the extra margins on based on what the market will bear. So it's still profitable. It's just.
So are you still actively looking then? Like you guys are.
I'm not looking as much for spec lots anymore. I'm not super excited about speculation at the moment. It's tough to figure out how cheap to go without diluting the brand. And what happens if things stay fine and then you underbuilt and people are like, I thought this is how you built, so the one thing that's a little bit tight for me, and that's why I'm moving into the other, my brand too off to the side. I still want to build nice stuff, but the point would be is this brand is known for X and you don't want to, you know what I mean? Start to be like that sign should be beside that house and not so much from a quality of actual how you treat the customer and how you do things. It's just more so as the materials go down. It might not be good for the brand, right? But yeah, the speculation is just less exciting right now. And as you know, it's right now the multiples that you're having to buy land at in some case aren't very fun either. I've had multiple people trying to sell me land for like 4-lot subdivisions, and they want $300,000 per assumed lot. Yeah, so there's no money there. And even if they're, so you're really subdividing just to have a lot. And you could still lose 30 grand, right? And I know some people that would have in the last 6 months. There's actually a few deals that I said no to. I wanted really bad, but I said no to that if I went through with it, I would have lost money based on this change. There's no question. So yeah, it's an interesting time to buy stuff for sure.
You mentioned the different wait times for permits. And I know you mentioned GBRD.
Yes.
It's notoriously bad for things like that.
We're talking Lake Couch, or are we talking?
No, we're talking about that.
Oh, Nanaimo, sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Wait for that. Like we've gone through it.
Yeah.
Have you ever built in Port Alberta?
I don't actually think we have to. Over. No.
Has anybody? Your experience?
I got 2 right now at development, right now, it's a rezone subdivision. Started it good, then the planner quit. The council didn't assemble properly. Delayed, but we got the so manager planning there is pro development, it's just does not staff. It's the process of approach. Yeah, it's kind of one of those, but for the most part, and they have the building inspector. He's good. He's really good guy.
Works twice a week.
But yeah, they're great. Port Alberta is volatile. Most people don't like Port Alberta because.
Can you speak up?
Sorry. Most people don't like investing in Port Alberta. Predominantly been volatile.
That's economically driven, right?
Yeah, like now we got the Santa Cruz invested a lot of money. We're different. Like I'm a realtor there as well, and the last 6 months I've been there that we're like doing everywhere, Dawson, Creed, God,
Just not developers, but people moving.
just general, yeah, just general for jobs. Some
That's-
people, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I live there. That's where I drove here from there. Yeah. I do like Parksville to North Island. Parksville, you can live in. I'm out of Misterville, it's fine. We don't operate the same space.
I don't know, just, not to put it spot Matt, but can you add anything about financing of new construction? Just me as a.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of people always want to know what rates and things like that, and like, I mean, nobody, every year for the last decade, people were like, well, you better take a 5-year fix. You never thought you'd get that back, and then it goes down. Then you're like, wow, who would have thought that? I won't even dare to guess the rates going forward. And I know banks are, really locking down on paperwork. And it's getting harder to pre-qualify, and there's going to be deals falling through. There are deals falling through all the time with financing right now. And it's just getting tougher and tougher. And I'd imagine, I'm not, new construction is pretty new to me. But it's probably going to get tougher too, right? Yeah.
Well, it has. I mean, one thing that happened to us recently is a client engaged us about 3 months ago. And at the time, they were approved for something in the area of 2,800 square foot house. And then, so they had a fixed rate that was locked in, but it had a time limit. And so they met us too close to that time limit, so we couldn't get them what they needed for that one. And then we didn't hear from them for a while, so they missed that. By the time I hear from them again, they've skinnied the house down to 2,000 square feet based on their next approval. And again, they had a time limit. I forget exactly what date it was. But they dragged their feet a little bit. They were skeptical of even trying. By the time they got, let's do it again, they gave me 2 weeks. Well, I call the bank and I say, what do you need from me to help get these people over the finish line at this number? And he ended up, they pretty much said, we actually need 2 weeks to even formalize it. So they got killed on that one. And we figured by the time we tried again, that we'd be at 1,700 square feet. So you can see one thing.
Banks don't like bare land, they don't like construction.
No. So, I mean, this kind of ties in, hopefully it's not the market we're in for a long time, but it is relevant. Is you do need some horsepower to get that all put together. So you can see right now as a buyer, and a lot of people that had money technically 2 years ago now are they're getting treated pretty average because these people have decent incomes and right, but it's just changing so fast. So people are really going to have to be able to. Well, what's actually the most unfortunate is they bought the property, and that's the tough part. Now they're at a place where they're not even sure they want the property because now before you know it, I may be building them a bloody shed. You know what I mean? Depending on how high these rates go up. And they bought 3 acres out in a Whiskey Creek area, and all of a sudden, what the hell's the point of having 3 acres, right?
Those are the people I'm looking for. Wait until their price drops.
Yeah.
They have to sell a property at a loss.
Exactly, but that's what I mean. So again, it's not to reiterate too much, but you can see the specialization and the communication between contractors is relevant and contractors talking with mortgage brokers as well. You can see that it's kind of a group effort now.
Well,
You know, to
what's
get-
wrong with building a smaller home like a 1,200 square foot home? He's not gonna lose for 3 acres and a home.
You could talk to the wife. That's it.
Well, and the other thing
Yeah.
too is like, I don't
Yeah.
think the price corrections have actually gotten to us. Because,
Yeah.
and I explain this to a lot of people, and they say, when people decide to sell a home or buy a home, they've already locked it in their mind. Like they start thinking about if they're selling now, thinking about it in March, and in March they were rich.
That's right.
And so I'm sure you see it. They come into the market, and now they're talking to Jason, they're like, it's July. They're like, well, this isn't realistic price. They're like, but I already thought about that price in March. Yeah. And that's when everything was going crazy. And so I don't think people have actually, when you talk about pricing things appropriately, there's probably a small portion of people listening to things they're delusional, right? Like they're writing these prices that are just not, and like I said, they'll just sit and expire or.
And-
The market's been doing this.
Yeah.
And so they're aiming here,
Yeah.
thinking that's where we're going. In the meantime, they've done that, right?
Yeah.
And they're just not willing to accept that, right? But if they don't need to sell, they just won't sell. But it's the people that have to sell that need to come to realization.
And that's one of the reasons why I look at fair land right now. It's because, you can't get a mortgage for the stuff. So you're carrying it with some type of credit, like a line of credit and that's going up and up and up. So how long are you gonna keep on holding on to that land? If you have no buildings on it, you can't mortgage it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think most people's borrowing power has dropped by, we were at like the sub 2% to now like 5.25%. You lost about a third of your borrowing power. Your mortgage payments on $100,000 went from about $400 to about $600 a month. So
That's excluding
That's-
how much
yeah.
food is went up.
Taking the purse.
Yeah.
I've also heard, I don't know, maybe I could talk more about this. I've heard rumors of if there is a price increase in September, they're talking about possibly extending amortizations, possibly out to 40 years again.
Makes
If there's anything behind that.
Well, yeah, I don't know. Big one they're talking about now is everybody that's on variable fixed rate payments, which is my go-to for all my rental. Some of my amortization periods are like 42 years now, just by default of the fact that I'm locked in at that, the payment level. Not a ton of lenders do it, but they're talking about this thing. So I actually was just proactively just adding payments, voluntarily to keep it under that, because there's the fine print somewhere you can find it where they basically say, now you're going backwards on it, then they do a reset of your payments at that level to get it back to 30 years or 25 years. Something to be,
One
it's not
thing-
everything, everybody says variable rates, but there's a difference between an adjustable rate mortgage and a variable fix, and so.
One thing I've seen that's interesting, that it's a bit of a long-term goal. I see that the play in the future might be for contractors, honestly, either to have strong partnerships with people like yourself or to actually own those firms. Because I feel like right now, construction is a pretty fragmented industry and there's a lot of communication issues. And right now, there's not a lot of time for lack of communication. Like one of the reasons these people really did miss the boat on the 2,000 square feet was that mortgage broker is not that incentivized to fix my problems, right? There's no partnership, there's no real incentive. So I think somewhere down the road, if people are actually gonna get serviced properly, it's gonna have to be more and more like the Googles of the world. It's tie up all these problems in one space. So when you show up, you're getting appropriate information. Is right?
I don't want to slag my industry, but I mean, I got into the industry and I'm still reasonably new to it, but you know, because of my portfolio and just the way my, you know, I've always been self-employed, and you know, once you get past a certain amount of properties, it just, you know, path is least resistant. So I got Matt here with 9 single-family houses, no real job. And you got, you know, Jim and Jane, they're both teachers and they're gonna be CMHC, 5% down. You got a, you know, guarantor for mom. You know, this is like rubber stamp, right? So every time I'll put this on top of, you know, and it's natural. And for a lot of times with investors, it's a whole specialty space. And it's a lot more work. So, you know, you get to the bottom, you know, your file is here and you're like, you know, my file's this thick, I got 17 lease agreements, you know. I don't, you know, they don't. So they do like one investor or 2 a year, and it's just not something they're routinely. Right?
So, I have a question for you. So if you want to be a builder, and there's not, like in my experience, there's not a particular a lot of raw land, or you know, like there's
Not here.
onesie twosies and some infill, but there's no. You were talking 6-packs and what have you. So if you want to be a builder, how are you going to be a builder if you don't have land?
Partnerships, or I got to do it myself. Yeah, it's
The
honestly
partnerships?
no
Oh,
partnerships. I mean, that's the reason for starting up the development portion of the company. Is really I was getting the same hint that you're getting, right? It was starting to be cute to be a builder that doesn't develop. It's like, so what? You and every other guy can build, right? So it's land is king, and it's going to be. So I think honestly, it's going to take some. You're going to have the human capital in your company now that some of the big players have. Like, I mean, the solopreneur, it's going to be tight right now because the people you're facing, I'm sure you've seen it sometimes. You research the title and you see who's already acquired the property. You thought you sniffed out first. And these aren't small companies, and they're capitalized by some of the bigger, you know, private equity firms, even world known ones, right? So at this point, I think it kind of takes a team, you know, and you're going to have to kind of, again, have a strong enough team that you can go get bigger and bigger chunks of capital so you can actually tie up these land, or the land that still has the opportunity to be profitable. There's not a lot of profit left in these 4 or 5 lot subdivisions. They're so tight. And almost every person that's selling it now kind of knows the multiples and tries to push it. So in some cases, you'll get the only people that will still buy these are maybe someone from the mainland that has more cash than brains at the time. You know what I mean? And they see that, and they still think maybe there's enough appreciation to make money on it, but they don't realize some of the, you know, the intrinsic factors that are going to stop you from making money.
Very good.
Does that kind of answer what you
It
did?
does answer the question. So
Yeah.
in your, so I'm guessing that you speak with other contractors and builders in your realm. And in the last couple of years, business has been good for construction industry and real estate, and many people sit in this space. So other than like, okay, so previously, you know, completing on a home, on a build, and getting your lift in it, and having that time for the value of the property, and watching it realize has been, I don't know, I'm gonna guess in a couple of $100,000 per unit
You say
in profit
for the actual bill?
for the builder.
It depends on how big it is.
For
It's
sure.
still percentage based. So I
Okay.
mean, if it's a $700,000 house, you know, it's starting to only be around 100,
Right.
and so on and so forth.
Okay, so fair enough. Without diving into semantics, so what's the word around the water cooler as far as who's willing to take haircuts? And like the good old days where like when everyone was happy making $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 on a house,
I think
which
it's
was
gonna,
good.
it's gonna be a game of chicken probably.
Right, so because that's what, you know, that was good money.
Yeah.
And then it's been hundreds of thousands, so.
I
like,
think
what are
part
your-
of where that is, honestly, I think only thing that's changed is the amount of revenue. I don't think markup hasn't changed in some cases. You know what I mean? So now it's just bigger because of how much more the house is.
Right,
So I think some people might skinny their markup if it gets competitive enough. yeah, there's probably room for some haircuts. I think you're gonna have to fight less for it in the custom space,
For sure.
just because it's super specific and they want what they want and that's how it goes. And there's only so many custom builders, whereas the haircuts, I think, are gonna be in the spec builds more so in the future, but. it's hard to say. I imagine you're right.
I don't know, I was just trying to get an idea of what this looked like from what you guys think.
I mean, we already are having to look at dropping stuff on spec builds, so there is haircuts coming. I think honestly, whoever's panicking the most probably has the most inventory.
Right.
So if you find out how much land they have, you'll probably be able to squeeze them a little bit tighter, because there is people panicking that have big holdings right now.
Sure.
They might have 13 lots that not so much just at the development stage, they're actually already building. So this cycle's gonna scare the shit out of it. Good, enough for me? Yep.
Anyone have
Thanks,
any
guys.
other- Real estate related questions over here?
I got one for you, Jason.
Sure.
Been reading a lot in the papers about the RIPs coming in and buying old age homes, buying also residential, real estate, and like kicking people out, and renting them out, like what they did with apartment buildings. Like, have you seen any of this stuff happening?
Who coming in and buying them up?
The real estate investment trusts.
Oh, REITs?
The REITs.
Yeah, I've heard about that. And yeah, I mean, that was a big thing that happened down in the States, and some of them are stepping in. And that's definitely happening on the multifamily, especially like the bigger, the better. They're not really dealing with smaller houses and stuff. It's too much work for them, right? They like the bigger multifamily
Oh,
stuff.
okay, because I heard that they were starting to buy like individual houses now.
They might be, I don't know. I haven't. followed-
States like Blackstone or.
Yeah.
Yeah. Say BlackRock recently did a $50 million raise, so they're,
Yeah.
got some money ready to
Yeah.
deploy.
Yeah, so that
Have
definitely
you
happens.
seen any of that activity here?
Yeah, and that's the problem is it's very hard to compete with them because they're basically coming in with cash, right?
Tons.
And so, and it's no different than an investor competing with a cash buyer. If a cash buyer is gonna give somebody $800,000 for a house and they don't need a mortgage, it's really easy to make that property cash flow. If you're gonna put 20% down and go get a traditional mortgage, you might not be able to make that property float. So it's very difficult to compete with people that are willing to accept a very low return on your investment. And a lot of those REITs, they are pretty low, right? I mean, you're typically making whatever 4 or 5%, maybe 7% if you're lucky, whereas most investors need to make, 15% for it to just cover the mortgage. So, yeah, it's happening on kind of every level. But yeah, I haven't heard too much about them coming in and buying up a lot of houses, but it could be happening.
Not yet, you're on that one, okay.
Yeah.
BC tenant laws are too scary for those kind of institutional. You can't just compete on, voting, But even New Brunswick, everybody's going ancient from. But then they stopped that, so there's a lot of people that bought these small multis and now they're like, oh, because they had all these like huge lifts, they're gonna kick everyone out and blah, 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 everyone's gonna pay huge amounts of rent if they move to Toronto. But then they stopped that, they put it to a percentage.
Yeah, and
Not BC, but.
I don't know if it'll be similar this time around, but I know in the States, when they came in and they were buying up so much real estate in 2010, 2011, when everything was depressed, they came in and scooped up this incredible amounts of real estate, but they weren't in for long before they started unloading because they kind of wrote it up and then they just dispersed. They're very risk adverse, and they like to get money in where it's stable, and if things are unstable, they're usually the first ones to pull the pin and leave. So I don't know. Typically, they don't hold these properties for a decade. They're usually like in and out for a year, and then they're done. So I don't know all of their business models and exactly where they're focused on, but yeah, unfortunately, yeah, we do have to kind of compete with that kind of industry. But I haven't heard too much about them in the single family. Yeah.
Another question for you then. So it's been quite a significant and in the last couple of years sharp rise in real estate, and so everyone is, it's certainly many things have upset the current situation over the last few months, right? Yeah, have been so much fun. Do you see crystal ball, the market's gonna do this in a year or two, like, what do you think in like the 5 and 10 year? Like, is there any talk in your space about that, about what it looks like and how housing is going to look moving forward?
So I typically, when people are looking to invest in real estate, I say, if you have a 2-year plan, it's always high risk. We don't know where it's going to be in 2 years. 5 years, you're likely going to be higher than where you're at any given point in time. 7 to 10 years, I don't know of any 7 to 10 year window where real estate in Canada has been lower than it was previously. So I mean, everyone thinks that this is going to be the crash of all crashes, and it's never going to come back. It won't. It has to come back up. It always comes back up. If it doesn't come back up, we've got bigger problems. So it will come back as long as you intend to hold the property for at least 5 years. I don't think it's a risk. Canada has the lowest housing per capita of any G7 country. So we have more people than we do housing, and that's going to create a constant pressure for the demand, right? So the demand hasn't really gone away. It's just people's borrowing power has been limited, and people are a little bit concerned about the market. But as soon as the media starts saying, oh, it's turned around and it's on the recovery, and everyone believes that, and everyone will jump back on the wagon, right? So I think, especially Vancouver Island, this is where people want to live if you're Canadian. And there might be markets that tank elsewhere in Canada harder, but even they will recover. But I think we're going to weather it a lot better on the island than elsewhere.
Like what you're saying, the skies are falling in, like, okay, the market went up 35% last year. Now it's come back, what, 10%?
Yeah.
Like,
Is it even that much?
It's hard to tell. It's still pretty early, right? So yeah, I'd say maybe it's corrected somewhere between 5 and 10%. But from 2 years ago, we're up
still
like
20.
60%.
Yeah.
So yeah, even up to like 80% from a couple of years ago. So yeah, we have a long ways to fall before we drop back below where we're. But you're absolutely right. The sky is falling. Everyone thinks that these recessions are super steep and really long. And if a couple months ago, I did a presentation where I showed the timeline of recessions. And typically they're 18 months. So the 2008 recession, I think, was less than 18 months, and the early 2000 recession, I think, was less than a year. So we're going to see a dip, and then it's going to be recovered. In a year's time, 18 months' time, we're going to be back on the climb. And not necessarily in 18 months we'll be back to where we were, but we'll be going back up to where we are, right? So I really like investing in real estate because it's a necessity. Until they find an alternative to people living in houses, they're going to keep going back to it, right? We haven't found a solution to that. So in the meantime, people are going to keep buying houses. So I think it's pretty safe.
Is there any economic people in this room that has an economic background or anything that's been to $350 billion injected into our money market in the government?
I'm not an economist, but I have spoken about the inflation, and I believe we're at about 400 billion by now. And yes, that since the beginning, that's why we're in the inflation state that we're in. And it's funny, they denied it for a year, 18 months. Oh, it's transitory, it's just supply chain issues. No, there's no inflation. And now they're going, oh, there's inflation. And yeah, when you print 20% more money than what's in circulation, you cause mass inflation. So
politicians were some of this?
no.
Never. But the midterms in November, things could start, once they know that the Republicans will get back into the money managers. It could start straightening out a little bit.
Well, I think it will start straightening out.
Lowering the gas prices.
Yeah, and interest rates going up have already brought it down to some degree. The thing is, they now have to try to land this thing without driving it into a recession, but stopping inflation. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to print money to stop a recession, but they're causing inflation. So they have a very, very difficult task of trying to balance those two things. And we're either going to be headed for some level of recession, or we're going to continue to see some level of inflation. And it's going to be one or the other. They're not going to get it perfect, but they're trying to get it back on track.
They gotta get it better. Well, you got food higher, gasoline higher, like mortgages are higher. They've got to work on that.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, houses probably are are probably peaked off. And that's what they wanted.
Yeah.
People couldn't afford to buy a house anymore, you had to have 5 families.
Yeah.
So it might get better in a couple of years or a
Yeah.
year or so.
And I mean, things play out. We see, I mean, typically inflation's 3% a year. Well, I don't think it's ever been 3%. There's years where it's been 0, and then there's years where it's 10. It's not a straight line, right? So obviously we've just seen major inflation. It's going to have to taper off to get back to kind of the norm.
Yeah.
And hopefully they don't drive us into the ground while they're doing it. But I guess we'll find out. We're along for the roller coaster one way or another.
I was just gonna say something about that, that's fine.
Yeah.
I think one thing that we're up against prior, over the last few recessions and stuff like that, is there is a demographic shift, right? We're about as old as we've ever been. So the fact of the matter is, there's less and less people creating supply, but there's still people, you know what I mean, like that need that.
Yeah.
So the demand is there. We still have that period of these mouths still need to be fed, but they aren't working as much, or they're not working at all, right? So mass retirement is definitely going to be inflationary.
Yeah.
Because then anyone that's left is going to have upward pressure on wages. So some of this stuff isn't necessary. Like the government is the government, but there's something to be said about it. Some of these demographic cycles dictate more than the policy, and the policy is doing its best to shore up a dead horse.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
And there's,
and unless you move the age of 70, or retirement age up to 70, and stand behind people with a whip, it wouldn't be popular either, would it? Right? So I mean, there's certain things that just aren't going to be fixed
Yeah.
easily.
and there's a lot of moving parts. That's a big part of it. Is as the price of everything skyrocketed, people cashed out on their properties and retired early, and that left a huge shortage of employees that are producing things. And there's a million things, right? And also the big hand down of the baby boomers that did grow major amounts of wealth that are handing back down to their kids, and then the baby boomers that didn't have any wealth and are handing nothing down. We're seeing the biggest transfer of wealth in history, and that's affecting some people very differently than it's affecting other people.
So I think that quality will be peaking. Some are going to do really well, some are
Yeah, it's hard to predict the future.
And like, the big thing we're probably forgetting, wages that have to go up.
Yes,
Like my friend that works for a warehouser, they got a 2.5% increase in wages. Well, they need, if they had 5%, then they'd be closer to inflation than we wouldn't be talking about.
Yeah, no, the big losers in this, unfortunately, are people that are working 9-to-5 jobs and don't own a lot of assets. The people that their cost of living has gone up 20% or 15%, and their wage has gone up 2-3%. Those are the people that are absolutely getting hammered in inflation, and it's a really unfortunate.
But don't forget, it's the inflate, like if we have 5% inflation, they're just got 2.5%. So it's really only 2.5% more than what, like, it is costing more, but it's not as bad as you think if you get the wage increase.
Yeah,
There's upward pressure on more inflation though.
yeah, it does. As the cost of everything goes up, as you
Where it
increase.
actually gets to where socialism meets is that the fact of the matter is you can only pay so much before there's no point being a business owner. And then
Yeah.
you see people walking away, you get what I mean? So there's that
Yeah,
healthy
the
balance
cost of
of
things
risk
has to
versus
be-
reward.
yeah.
Because all of a sudden you'll see why would the business owner want to do it for the same exponentially more risk, and his employees are right there on his doorstep.
Yeah,
money. So
so we just gotta get rid of the socialism. Socialism.
well, it's a lot of the ideas are right. It's just
And the Ukrainians.
Yeah, it's a balancing act, but I also believe that things will regulate themselves. If people can't afford to live, then their wages are going to have to increase, and it will become a self-regulating thing eventually.
Well, actually, it's like the dampen demand enough that there's a reset.
Yeah.
With the demand so high, this is
Yeah.
problematic, but eventually we might have to come back down on wages.
Yeah. Anyone else got anything else before we wrap it up? And just so everyone knows, I don't know, traditionally we head out for dinner afterwards if anybody wants to join us. I don't know if we're going to head to the Cactus Club maybe, but yeah, if anybody wants to come out, carry on the conversation and do a bit of networking, you're more than welcome to. Yeah, so anyhow, thanks for coming out, everybody. And yeah, if anybody didn't get a free water bottle, there's free water bottles over here. And yeah, it's good value. You can come on next.